Forget what the movies told you. Real Wild West gunfights didn't look heroic. They looked like accidents. Men fired from arm's length and still missed. Smoke filled the room after the first shot. Guns jammed, ears rang, someone went down, and half the time nobody even knew who fired the round that hit them. There were no clean duels, no countdowns. Most gunfights were over in seconds. Not because someone was dead, but because someone panicked, ran, or collapsed from a wound that wouldn't kill them until days later. Because on the frontier, surviving the gunfight didn't mean surviving the wound. Infection finished what lead started. Men who walked away from the shooting often died later, alone, with no doctor and no chance. And before this is over, you'll see why most men didn't lose gunfights because they were slow. They lost because everything failed at once. Number 15. Gunfights happened at spitting distance. Most Wild West gunfights happened close enough to touch. 3 feet, 5 feet, arm's length, close enough to smell whiskey on another man's breath, close enough to see his hand shaking when he reached for the gun. That's where real gunfights happened. Not across long streets, but across tables, doorways, and narrow gaps inside saloons where there was nowhere to step back and no room to breathe. At those distances, missing should have been impossible. It wasn't. Men still missed, even when the barrel was close enough to touch the other man's chest, because fear, adrenaline, and panic turned hands into liars. But when a shot connected at that range, the damage was catastrophic. Powder burns mixed with entry wounds. Clothing caught fire. Bones shattered from muzzle blast alone. Wild Bill Hickok killed Davis Tutt in 1865 at roughly 75 yards, a shot so rare it became legendary precisely because it was unusual. Most gunfights weren't duels. They were explosions of violence that started when 2 men got too close to back down and ended before anyone realized the fight had begun. Number 14. Most shots missed completely. Even at point-blank range, most bullets never found their target. Men fired in panic, flinched from recoil, jerked the trigger instead of squeezing it. Revolvers weren't precision instruments. They were short-barreled, loose-jointed tools with rudimentary sights that demanded practice most cowboys never had. A Colt single-action army might hit what you aimed at if you took your time, lined up the sights, and fired carefully. In a gunfight, no one had that luxury. Accounts from Tombstone, Dodge City, and Deadwood describe exchanges where 6 or 8 shots were fired and no one was hit. Bullets punched through walls, shattered windows, and buried themselves in wood posts while the men firing them stood close enough to shake hands. Luke Short and Jim Courtright emptied their revolvers at each other in Fort Worth in 1887. Courtright fired 5 times. Short fired 8. Courtright died from wounds to the chest and thumb. Short walked away untouched. That was typical. Most rounds fired in anger never connected, and the ones that did often weren't the ones the shooter intended. Number 13. Guns were inaccurate junk by modern standards. The revolvers that dominated the frontier weren't sharpshooter tools. They were mass-produced, loosely fitted, and built to a tolerance that would horrify modern gunsmiths. Cylinders wobbled, barrel-to-cylinder gaps leaked gas. Sights were rudimentary, a front post and a groove in the frame, neither adjusted for windage or elevation. A Colt Peacemaker fresh from the factory might group decently at 25 yards if the shooter knew what he was doing. After a year in a holster, bouncing on a saddle, dropped in dust, and neglected between uses, that same revolver became a mechanical compromise. Timing slipped, forcing cones eroded. The weapon still fired, but precision wasn't part of the deal anymore. Gunsmiths in Dodge City and Tombstone made steady money fixing revolvers that wouldn't index properly or wouldn't fire at all. Cowboys didn't carry backup guns because they wanted to look tough. They carried them because the first one might not work when it mattered. Number 12. Black powder smoke turned gunfights blind. The first shot changed everything, not because it hit or missed, but because it filled the room with smoke so thick you couldn't see 3 feet in front of your face. Black powder didn't burn clean. It detonated into a rolling white cloud that hung in the air like fog, thicker indoors and slow to clear even outside. One shot from a .45 Colt produced enough smoke to obscure a man's vision. 3 or 4 shots turned a saloon into a choking, blinding haze where shapes moved like shadows and muzzle flashes were the only points of reference. Men fired at sounds, at movement, at nothing. They couldn't see who they were shooting at, couldn't tell if their rounds connected, couldn't distinguish friend from threat. By the time the smoke cleared, the fight was often over. Bodies on the floor, wounded men staggering toward doors, and no clear sense of who had fired which shots. The OK Corral gunfight in 1881 lasted 30 seconds and produced roughly 30 shots. Witnesses described the scene afterward as a wall of smoke so dense they couldn't identify who was still standing until the cloud drifted away. Quick question, before this goes further. Do you think most gunfights were decided by skill or by luck and chaos? Drop one word in the comments. I'm curious where you land. Number 11. Reloading was practically impossible. Mid-fight, Hollywood makes reloading look smooth. A gunfighter flips open the loading gate, thumbs out spent cases, slides in fresh rounds, and snaps the cylinder shut, all while staying calm and aware. In reality, reloading a single-action revolver under pressure was a nightmare that got men killed. Each chamber had to be rotated manually to the loading gate. Each spent case had to be pried out with the ejector rod, a thin metal pin that bent, jammed, or slipped if the case expanded from heat. Each live round had to be thumbed in carefully because fumbling one meant losing seconds you didn't have. Most men never finished reloading. They either retreated, switched to a backup gun, or got shot while trying. Fired cases swelled in the cylinder from heat and fouling, refusing to eject cleanly. Fingers slipped. Rounds dropped. Panic turned a mechanical task into a frantic scramble that ate time and focus while the fight kept moving. Some men carried preloaded cylinders, swapping them out instead of reloading chamber by chamber. That worked if you had a second cylinder and the presence of mind to execute the swap without dropping anything. Most didn't. Number 10. Guns misfired constantly. Pulling the trigger didn't guarantee the gun would fire. Sometimes the hammer fell on a dud primer. Sometimes the cartridge was corroded. Sometimes the firing pin didn't strike hard enough. Misfires weren't rare. They were expected, and they turned gunfights into brutal games of chance where mechanical failure could cost you everything. Frontier ammunition was inconsistent. Cartridges sat in belts, pockets, and saddlebags for months, exposed to moisture, heat, and grit. Primers degraded, powder clumped, cases corroded at the rim. Even factory-fresh rounds from reputable makers sometimes failed, and cheap reloads were worse. A misfire in a gunfight meant the difference between walking away and dying while you frantically cocked the hammer again and prayed the next chamber held a live round. Men learned to skip over suspect cartridges, but in the chaos of close combat, remembering which chamber was bad and which was live was nearly impossible. John Wesley Hardin survived multiple gunfights, but described misfires as one of his greatest fears, not the other man's skill, but the possibility that his own weapon would betray him. Number 9. Alcohol started and ruined most gunfights. Whiskey didn't make men brave, it made them stupid. And stupidity in a room full of armed, drunk men turned minor insults into fatal confrontations faster than anything else on the frontier. Most gunfights started in saloons over gambling debts, insults, or perceived disrespect, amplified by alcohol, until neither man could back down without losing face. Liquor eroded judgment, slowed reaction time, and turned arguments that sober men would have walked away from into moments where someone reached for a gun. Alcohol didn't just start fights, it ruined them. Drunk men missed at close range. They fumbled reloads. They shot friends by accident and stumbled into their own line of fire. Witnesses in Dodge City and Tombstone described gunfights where both men were so intoxicated they could barely stand, firing wildly and hitting nothing until someone got lucky. Luke Short and long-haired Jim Courtwright were both drinking before their fatal encounter. Courtwright's revolver malfunctioned during the fight, possibly because his coordination was too impaired to operate it correctly under stress. He died in the street, and Short walked away, not because he was sober, but because his gun worked, and Courtwright's didn't. Number 8. Most gunfights were over in seconds. The Hollywood shootout drags. Men circle each other. They talk. They posture. Tension builds across minutes of screen time, and the audience gets to breathe before the bullets fly. Real gunfights lasted as long as it took to empty a cylinder. 3 seconds, maybe 5. There was no buildup, no countdown. Just an instant where words turned to action and the air filled with smoke and noise before anyone fully understood what was happening. The OK Corral fight lasted 30 seconds. 30 seconds for 30 shots, 3 dead and 3 wounded. Participants described it as a blur. Witnesses couldn't agree on who fired first because it happened faster than memory could process. By the time most people realized a gunfight had started, it was already over. That speed made survival random. The man who lived wasn't always the man who fired first. He was the man who didn't get hit in those critical seconds when everyone was pulling triggers and no one was aiming carefully. If this is the side of the Wild West you came for, the mechanics, the damage, the parts Hollywood leaves out, subscribe. This channel is built entirely around how things actually worked. Number 7. Ambushes and backshooting were common. Frontier gunfights weren't duels. They were murders disguised as confrontations, and the smart money was always on the man who shot first, preferably from behind, from cover, or from ambush. Fairness got you killed. Wild Bill Hickok died because Jack McCall walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the head while he played cards. Jesse James died the same way, shot by Robert Ford while hanging a picture. John Wesley Hardin was killed from behind by John Selman while standing at a bar. Billy the Kid was shot in the dark by Pat Garrett, who waited in a bedroom until Billy walked in unarmed. This wasn't cowardice. This was practicality. Men who wanted to survive didn't give their opponent a chance to draw. They waited for the right moment, approached from an angle that eliminated risk, and fired before the other man knew a fight had started. Newspapers condemned backshooting when it suited the narrative, but everyone on the frontier understood the logic. A fair fight was a stupid fight. Number 6. Innocent bystanders were hit regularly. Gunfights didn't happen in controlled environments. They happened in crowded saloons, busy streets, and small rooms packed with people who had no warning and no escape. And when the bullets started flying, they didn't stop just because someone wasn't involved. Stray rounds punched through walls, shattered windows, and hit people 3 buildings away. Bystanders were shot while standing at bars, sitting at card tables, or walking past doorways at the wrong moment. Children, women, workers, drunks. No one was safe once the shooting started. In 1881, during a street fight in El Paso, a stray bullet killed a man standing in a doorway 50 feet from the actual gunfight. He wasn't a participant. He was just there. In 1884, a bystander in a Las Vegas saloon was shot through the lung during a fight between 2 cowboys he didn't know. Courts rarely held shooters accountable for bystander deaths unless the victim was someone important. Most casualties were written off as bad luck, collateral damage in a fight that had nothing to do with them. Number 5. Indoor gunshots caused instant disorientation. Movies muffle gunshots. Real life doesn't. A .45 Colt fired indoors produces a sound loud enough to cause immediate hearing damage, disorientation, and temporary deafness. That first shot didn't just start the fight, it robbed everyone in the room of their ability to hear what happened next. The concussion from black powder detonating in a confined space was overwhelming. Ears rang. Balance faltered. Voices disappeared into muffled static. Men shouted and couldn't hear their own words. Commands, warnings, pleas for help, all of it vanished under the roar of gunfire and the aftermath of shattered hearing. That disorientation made everything worse. Men couldn't tell where the next shot was coming from. They couldn't hear footsteps or reloading or someone moving behind them. The fight became a purely visual experience, and in the smoke and chaos, vision wasn't enough. Survivors of indoor gunfights described the experience as surreal, a silent, smoky nightmare where everything moved too fast and nothing made sense. Some never fully recovered their hearing. Number 4. Clothing sometimes stopped bullets. Hollywood bullets punched through everything. Real bullets from underpowered black powder cartridges sometimes didn't. Heavy coats, layered vests, thick leather, even tightly folded cloth could slow or stop a round, especially if the gun was a small caliber pocket pistol or the range was just far enough for the bullet to lose energy. It wasn't reliable, it wasn't armor, but it happened. A .41 caliber Derringer fired at 10 feet might penetrate a shirt and bury itself in a vest without reaching skin. A .38 rimfire round could be stopped by a folded letter in a coat pocket. A thick wool coat in winter could turn a glancing shot into a bruise instead of a wound. Men didn't count on it, but they noticed. Some gamblers wore heavy vests for that exact reason, not as protection, but as a gamble that might save them if a fight turned bad. But even when clothing stopped the bullet, the impact was brutal. Broken ribs, deep bruising, powder burns that turned into infected wounds. Surviving the shot didn't mean walking away unharmed, it just meant not dying immediately. Number 3, getting shot didn't mean you were safe. The bullet hit, the man fell, the fight ended. But surviving the gunfight didn't mean surviving the wound. Frontier doctors had no antibiotics, no sterilization, no concept of infection control. Wounds were cleaned with whiskey or river water, probed with unsterilized fingers, and bandaged with whatever cloth was available. If the bullet stayed inside, it was often left there because removing it caused more damage. If it passed through, the wound was packed and hoped to heal. Most didn't. Gunshot wounds to the abdomen were almost always fatal, not from the bullet itself, but from the infection that followed. Intestines leaked waste into the body cavity. Peritonitis set in within days. Men died slowly, in agony, knowing the fight was long over, but the bullet was still killing them. Even minor wounds, grazes, flesh wounds, bullets that barely broke skin, could turn septic and kill if bacteria found a way in. The man who walked away from a gunfight might be dead a week later, fevered and delirious, his wound rotting from the inside out. Number 2, infection killed more men than the gunfight. The real dying started days later, not in the street, not in the saloon, but in a back room somewhere, with no witness and no drama. Just a man burning with fever, the wound red and swollen, the skin around it blackening as infection spread faster than any doctor could stop it. A gut shot meant sepsis. A shattered leg meant gangrene. A chest wound meant pneumonia. Even a clean hit to the arm could turn fatal if the bones splintered and fragments worked their way through tissue, tearing blood vessels and carrying bacteria deeper into the body. Frontier medicine couldn't fight infection. Wounds were cleaned, bandaged, and watched. If the fever came, there was nothing to do but wait. Some men recovered, most didn't. They died slowly, the wound festering, the body failing, the fight they'd survived becoming the thing that killed them after all. Billy Clanton survived the OK Corral long enough to be carried to a doctor. He died hours later. The bullet didn't have to kill you immediately. It just had to wound you. The frontier did the rest. Number 1, fear mattered more than skill. The fastest draw didn't win. The best shot didn't win. The calmest man won, the one who could pull the trigger while his heart hammered and his hands shook and every instinct screamed at him to run. Gunfights weren't about skill. They were about fear management. The man who could control his breathing, steady his hand, and aim while drowning in adrenaline had the advantage. The man who panicked, flinched, or froze lost, even if he practiced every day and could hit targets at 50 yards on a calm afternoon. Fear turned practiced shooters into amateurs. It made men miss at arm's length. It made them fumble reloads, drop cartridges, forget to cock the hammer. It made them freeze when they should have moved and move when they should have stayed still. Wild Bill Hickok wasn't the fastest. He was the calmest. He fired slowly, aimed carefully, and stayed composed while the other man panicked. That composure killed more men than speed ever did. Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp, John Wesley Hardin, every name that survived the frontier survived because they could function under pressure, not because they were born gunslingers. Fear didn't make men cowards. It made them human. And in a gunfight, being human was the most dangerous thing of all. 15 brutal truths. Not one of them Hollywood ever wanted you to see. The frontier gunfight wasn't a test of courage or skill. It was a mechanical failure waiting to happen. Smoke, noise, misfires, panic, and wounds that didn't kill immediately, but promised death days later when infection took over. The men who survived weren't heroes. They were the ones who got lucky, stayed calm just long enough, or shot first from an angle the other man never saw coming. Hollywood gave you duels. History gave you chaos. Hollywood gave you accuracy. History gave you smoke so thick you fired blind and missed at 3 feet. Hollywood gave you quick deaths. History gave you slow ones, fever, infection, gangrene, sepsis. Men who walked away from the fight but never made it home. The West didn't crown legends in the street. It buried them quietly after the wound turned and the fever came. And the men who survived carried bullets in their bodies and nightmares in their heads for the rest of their lives, knowing they'd won nothing but time.